Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and we are back, and I'm with Rick once again.
Hi.
You said hi this time, good. I'm not just gonna wave when nobody can see me, like last time. And this is part 2 to our cognitive distortion / thinking error podcast. So first one was just kind of going over the most common ones, and just kind of challenging those beliefs that you have. So if you haven't listened to part 1, go and do that. This one will make a lot more sense, because this one we're gonna go over, challenging these thoughts and really kind of how you would work through this in treatment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a couple of things that I want to start getting into. I said in part 1 we were talking about what language to use, and language is very specific. So the thinking errors, or rational thinking versus irrational thinking, has some similarities and differences in the language that we use. So for example, if you're being irrational, a lot of times what we're going to hear is must, always, have to, should, ought to. You're basically using this language and it becomes more extreme. And what I mean by extreme is irrational language isn't flexible. There's no yes or no, there's no give and take, and it's usually like awfulizing. It doesn't allow for the other person in the relationship or the conversation to exist. For example, if I say to you, Laurin, I need you to email me my workout plan now. What I'm basically saying to you is, I don't give a shit what you have going on, what's going on in your life, what's happening to you. You need to do this. Need is like, this happens now or I die. So that's the reality of the conversation. And the language that's being used creates this demanding and irrational component, because what's irrational about it? What's irrational about it is there are at least two people that exist in every conversation or relationship. And in order for it to be healthy, in order for it to be good and mutual, you have to give consideration. I said have to. There's another one. It would benefit you to give consideration to the other person. See?
Good job.
I think, yeah.
Fire this guy.
You give consideration to them. By saying, I need it right now, it says, I don't care what you have going on, do it. As opposed to if I were to say, Laurin, it would really benefit me if you could give me that today. Now what I've done is I've given consideration to you, and I've given consideration to what's happening in your life. You also have the ability to say no. If I say I need it right now, there is no okay, I guess I have to do this for you. Mm-hmm. So if you're using need, should, have to, must, those universal kind of things like always and never, nothing is always and nothing is never. And so you want to start paying attention to the language you use, and you want to start shifting it. How do we shift it? Well, rational language is the exact opposite. It is flexible. It allows for yes or no. It is non-awfulizing. So
that's
what
my
is
new favorite word, by the way.
Your new favorite word is awfulizing?
Oh my god, that's great. I'm going to use that so much.
Good. That's good, because I used your bag of dicks reference the other week. Somebody said something to me and I was like, eat a bag of dicks, and they were like, what? And I was like, I got it from a friend of mine. You're welcome. So I'm glad you can use.
I'm a true influencer.
You can use awfulizing all you want. What does rational language look like and sound like? You can take the same thing and you want to use things like I want, I would prefer, it would benefit me, I would like. So what this does is it's not demanding, it is more preferential. It is giving consideration to the other person and what they have going on, and you're no longer being as demanding, because it's not about an extreme, and that's what those extremes are. That's what thinking errors are. They live on extremes. We're trying to push our stress onto other people. So now, Laurin, I would really like it if you could give me my workout plan today. Or Laurin, it would be great if we could update my meal plan because I have a show coming up. I'm giving you the opportunity to say no. I'm giving consideration to the other person that's there. So changing the language that you're using is extremely important. And whenever you hear somebody say you should do this, discard it right away. I mean, I'm not saying it from the sense of like a coaching perspective, but a lot of times when we're giving unsolicited advice, we're saying, I should be doing this. And the other person has no regard for the consequences. And should is a component of being irrational. because you're not evaluating it just off of one factor. You want to look at everything. So you want to stay away from shoulds. An old professor of mine used to say, "Don't should on me," right? So it's kind of that same philosophy. Stop taking or using should and start replacing it with "it might be better" or "I would like to."
This is actually when you say it like that makes so much sense within the scientific community, right? Mm-hmm. Like everybody, if you ever listen to an actual scientist or somebody who's, well educated or has put out research or whatever, right? Like those people are generally, they never give an answer, right? And that's always like what frustrates a lot of people is like, oh, scientists are never straightforward, like they never tell me what to do or they never have an answer for anything. And it's like, well, it's for good reason. Mm-hmm. And if somebody starts saying things like, okay, you should always be doing this, you should never have that, you should be eating this instead of that. Of course, there are some things that are going to be better or worse than others, right? But again, that's like it's not like a one or the other. Right. And all of this, I always look through everything as like the food psychology lens of it, and like that is so important when you're labeling foods, because that is the problem that most people have with them. If somebody tells you like, oh, you shouldn't have that, well then guess what, you want that, even if you didn't really want it before. But if all of a sudden you told me like, I can't eat, I don't know, M&Ms, which I happen to like M&Ms. I happen to have them every once in a while. It's not like I have them every day. Mm-hmm. But now all of a sudden, if I can't have them, now I see them everywhere, right? I go to the store and I check out and I'm like, oh, there's some M&Ms there. I'm like, man, I really want them. Or like now I'm just thinking, I have this craving. I should probably have those, but I can't. Oh my gosh. And then what ends up happening? You end up overeating a whole bag of M&Ms.
Right.
And like, this is really dramatic, but it's not, because this is literally what happens all the time in our industry. Mm-hmm. And it happens mainly with food. Obviously it can happen with training recommendations or cardio recommendations or supplement recommendations, whatever. But as soon as somebody starts saying like, you have to be doing this or you should be doing this, even in a coaching setting, you should be very wary of that person.
Right. There are very few examples of situations where you're going to need language that's that strong.
Yeah.
And so for the listeners who are like, look, what are some activities and exercises I should be doing? Write those words down. Write down should, need, must, have to. Write those down. And then right below them, put the words like I want, I would like, it would benefit me, I would prefer. Mm-hmm. Catch how many times a day you start using those words and you're like, oh my God, right? And you start to see it like, whatever the example is, you're not giving consideration to the other person. You're not allowing them to say yes or no. You're basically forcing somebody into situations, and this is where resentment can build up. This is where contempt builds up. This is where other emotions, anxiety starts to build in people, because it's like, oh my God, if I don't respond the way that they're whatever, and so we start catastrophizing or rejecting them, and it starts to come full circle, and it becomes this big mess. Mm-hmm. So number one, understand the difference between rational and irrational language. That's a big part, because a lot of the thinking errors and the irrational beliefs that exist, you'll see those things. Let's go back to that list real quick. People and events of the world should be fair. There we see should. I should be good at everything I do. Some people are bad and should or must be punished. I should become upset over my problems. You see a pattern developing here? Irrational beliefs are demanding. Irrational beliefs do not allow for you to think logically and rationally. They don't want you to see both sides of it. And so you get stuck in these patterns that keep you really unhappy, really anxious, really depressed, and also they make everybody around you pretty miserable.
So then I was gonna say, this kind of almost makes it like this like self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because literally when you continue to say these things or act this way or think this way, at some point it's going to happen, good or bad. Like, right? Like,
you find the reasons to make it happen.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked about confirmation bias in the past. I think I have some notes on it. What is confirmation bias for our listeners? Confirmation bias basically exists where you develop a belief about yourself, about the world. And what we begin to do then is, because we have that belief, we begin subconsciously or unconsciously, you seek out the information that justifies that belief. And if you don't challenge that, what happens is you could be looking at 10 pieces of information, but you're going to focus on the two that acknowledge and validate your core belief, or acknowledge the belief about yourself, and you're going to ignore the other 8 things. And why is this important? It's not that your thing is necessarily wrong, but by ignoring the other 8, what you're doing is you're taking the balance out of the decision. You're skewing it to one side. This is really common in relationships where people are arguing and they're like, why can't they see my side of this story? So the reason they can't see the side of it is because they're utilizing confirmation bias as well. And so it becomes really difficult to see somebody else's perspective if you are only focusing on the reasons that justify your position. So by paying attention to those things, by being aware of these things, this is how you begin to change them. So one of the other things that I want to start moving into is we're going to get into how to dispute irrational beliefs, but what I want to do is paint a picture of why irrational beliefs, not just that they exist, we covered that, but how they manifest in the ways that you feel and how you behave. So we call this like ABCs of REBT. REBT is rational and emotive behavioral therapy. Some people have seen this before. So let's paint a picture. An event happens in our life. This is an activating event. Whatever that event is. It doesn't matter if somebody wants to give me an example, or if you could think of one. I was like, somebody, like, we have a live audience.
Can anybody
here
give me an example? Please, what do you want me to give?
I don't know.
I fucking told you, don't put me on the spot.
So, an example, who cares? An event happens.
Now I care.
Now you care?
Now I care.
All right,
now
so
I want
let's
an example. But I don't know what we're talking about, so.
Right, so it's going to be hard. An activating event. Somebody's running late for a meeting. So the event is a person shows up 15 minutes late for a meeting. Okay. Now, that in and of itself doesn't trigger an emotional response. What we think is, what we have is the event. And what we oftentimes recognize immediately after that is how we feel and how we behave about that event. So if a person is late for a meeting, they're late for dinner, they're late coming home, we immediately pay attention to what we feel. We feel angry, we feel disappointed, we feel frustrated. And our behavior is to shut down, to be aggressive, to yell at them, to treat them snidely. Well, what happened in between that? B is what exists. B is our irrational beliefs. Because you have to filter the event through some sort of lens. It gets filtered through, if we want to look at it in terms of just saying it's either positive or negative. Okay? So your irrational belief about whatever just happened determines whether this is positive or negative. Here's the point. A person's 15 minutes late for the meeting. You immediately get mad, angry, and you yell at the person, right? That's a typical reaction because you filtered it through your irrational belief that whatever, things should be fair or that this was inconsiderate. So you filtered it through that negative lens. Mm-hmm. As opposed to like, hey Lauren, I'm 15 minutes late, but guess what? I just won the lotto and I'm going to give you $2 million. Suddenly me being late is not a bad thing. Right? Suddenly now me being late is a good thing and it benefited you. So if I showed up and was like, hey, you're going to get $2 million today, what are you going to think? Well, this is awesome and this is wonderful and you're going to be filled with all these euphoric feelings. So what changed? Nothing about the event changed. It's the exact same event. I was still 15 minutes late. What changed is the way you're thinking about it. And this is where your belief system comes into play. If you know what you believe, what you think about an event, it will determine what you feel and how you behave. If you think something is positive, you will feel positively about it and you will behave in a way that represents positive emotions. If you think something is negative, you will behave in a way that creates negative emotions and creates negative behaviors. And so it's these irrational beliefs that are so fundamental and they happen in a split second. You don't even pay attention to them. What happens is something happens, you make a split second decision about it and you feel pissed. You feel anxious, you feel depressed, and you don't pay any attention to what happened in between it. It's like a freight train going by, you barely see it. But this is the key to understanding how you feel about a situation, right? We've talked about in the past, assuming positive intent, right? So what is assuming positive intent? You ask somebody to do something and they don't do it. Hey, can you clean the dishes out of the sink before I get home from work? Sure, no problem. I come home from work, the dishes are still there, I'm pissed. I'm pissed because you clearly don't respect me, you don't value my opinion, and you did this on purpose, right? But the reality probably is something different. You got busy at work, you just forgot about it. So the reality is you're not being disrespectful. You were mindless about it, you forgot about it. You weren't being malice about it, it was just, and so there's the difference between the two. It's paying attention to what your belief is and why it's so important to understand our beliefs because that's what changes how we feel and how we behave. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
No, that was a good example. I would have not come up with that, so I'm glad you asked the audience.
Yeah,
they
thanks,
gave
audience.
Something. Thanks, guys.
Could
you imagine me doing a live show? Oh my god.
No. No.
No.
I mean, I could if it
Full
was
meltdown.
scripted.
Yeah, I have like a teleprompter. I'm like, okay, this is what we're gonna say. What was that guy? He wrote those meditation books where he had like a panic attack on TV.
Did he
oh my
use
god.
one of his
What is his name? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do not know.
Fuck. Dan Harris.
Okay.
10% Happier. Okay. He has a meditation app. He has a few books. Anyways, basically he was like a news anchor, and then he was, had a bunch of things going on and was just overstressed, had some substances, like just kind of all that stuff, right? And then literally one day he had a full blown like panic attack on live TV. It was like the morning news. Like it wasn't just like, some little show. And he literally just like lost it. And then he left and he's like, all right, like I need to figure my shit out. And then he went on this whole journey. Anyways, it's like a super interesting story.
Became a Buddhist, I'm sure.
Not quite, but he did go through that stuff. But anyways, that would be me. If just paint that picture. All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop ruining your ABCs.
No, you're good. No, we're kind of done with the ABCs.
Okay.
That's essentially what that is. And so the second part of it is, how do we dispute what our irrational beliefs are? How do we change our thinking errors? Well, thinking errors are a little bit easier to kind of identify. We can see patterns developing. Our irrational beliefs is like, until we're looking at the list, until we're talking about specific examples, they might be a little bit more hidden for people. But oftentimes it's really relevant to understand that. So when you do catch an irrational belief, like, okay, for example, let's use one of them. It is necessary to be loved and approved of. Or better yet, let's stay away from that. There's too many people that might trigger. Talk about fairness. The world should be fair and fairness must exist. All right, so we have this irrational belief that fairness must exist. We know it's irrational because we hear should in it right away. That should be a trigger for everybody who's listening to this. If I hear need, if I hear must, it should be sending off red flags. This person's being irrational. They're using demanding language, like pay attention to that. If you start paying attention to it, you will hear how often and in every conversation those words come up. And then we kind of wonder why we're overwhelmed with stress and how to start communicating better and how to start thinking differently. So one of the things that we teach our clients, or that I teach my clients, is what we call ELF. ELF is an acronym. It stands for empirical, logical, and functional. So for those of you who are listening who want another skill to do, what I want you to do is write down ELF. And what does empirical stand for? Basically, we're saying, what proof exists that this should be true? So right now, you think it's unfair that somebody else got the promotion over you. Great. Show me the proof that says this should be fair for you and why you should have gotten that promotion. Maybe not even why you should have gotten it, but tell me why this should have been fair. And what proof exists to prove that? You don't have any? Okay, so no for that one. Logical. Does it make sense? Does it make sense to believe that the world should be a fair place? If you say yes, explain that to me, because there's all these things that you're struggling with that don't fit that logic. So does it make sense to believe this anymore? No. Okay, there's strike two. And the last one, and this is the one that I want most people to really pay attention to, functional. Does it help me in the long run to believe this? If it doesn't help you in the long run, why are you holding on to it? And this gets me to where I ask my clients, what benefit are you getting from thinking this way, from holding on to this belief? Sometimes it's a way to sabotage ourselves. Sometimes it's a way to not move forward. Sometimes it's a way to hide from our fear. There's a variety of different reasons. And so some benefits can be good, some benefits are bad. But now what we're getting to is like, okay, now we know why this kind of exists. We know where it came from. How badly do you want to change this? Do you want to address it? And so empirical, logical, functional allows you to take anything that you're dealing with and say, great, where's the proof that this should actually exist? Does this make sense anymore in my life or in life in general? And number 2 or 3, is it functional? Does this help me in the long run? Because if it doesn't, why are you doing it still? Now we're starting to get into like, all right, this is how I dispute my irrational beliefs. So now, if you're looking at that and you were filtering it through your irrational belief lens before, like, it's unfair that they got the job, so that made me angry and I quit my job, right? That's the negative emotion and the behavior. Well, sometimes what we call our negative healthy emotions. So if anger is our immediate emotion, what's in between anger and calm? Frustration? Annoyed? Right? Is being annoyed better than being angry?
I'm not sure. I usually discourage angry. Is there an emotion in between?
Apparently, for Laurin, there is not. But for the rest of the world, There is. So annoyed is certainly better. Is it negative still? Yes, but it's better than being angry. It's not as destructive. And if you're annoyed, are you likely to quit your job? No. So now what can we do? We can reshift our focus and say, all right, what's my new belief system around this? Yeah, the world's not fair. Jim's a dickhead for giving him the promotion because I clearly have earned it. But what do I need to do to get the next one? Or what other opportunities do exist for me? So now I can reshift, and now I can have and start moving myself back to a place that is more peaceful and more rational, and that I don't get upset when things aren't fair, when things aren't going my way. And when they're not going my way, it's actually an irrational belief. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts, the hardcore REBT, doing the work and challenging yourself every day.
Yeah, and this is the stuff that, like we said in the first one, like a lot of people will drop off, right? Because it's not quick. There's no shortcut. There's no hack to get through these, especially if, depending on obviously your age or how deeply ingrained these are. If you've just developed a certain irrational fear, that'll probably be a lot easier to overcome clearly versus one that you've held on to for 20 years, right? The same way that any kind of habit, like any kind of negative habit in the context of what we do, I said it in the first one, like say you just don't work out. This is a really easy example, but if you haven't done that for 20 years, you're not all of a sudden going to be religiously going to 5 a.m. 5 days a week for the next 20 years, right? Like it's going to be some kind of a gradient to get there. But it's the like not fun stuff that you have to do, and like, hey, okay, like it's not cool to like go back, like it's not cool to start the gym like twice a week for like 45 minutes because you're like, no, I can do more. But it's like, sure, you could in the short term, just like any kind of diet. Like, of course, you can be really aggressive when you start. You can cut all your foods out. You can, do all this crazy stuff. Again, that goes to like that all or nothing thinking. That's actually way easier. And that's one of the biggest issues that we see in this space is that I always find that it's easier for people to go back to those types of behaviors. It's easier to be black and white.
Sure.
Especially when it comes to like diet and training and like that whole thing.
They become habits for people.
Yeah, it is so habitual to either say yes or no to everything. And then that kind of goes ingrained into your like, well, I should be able, like you can, I should be able to do this.
Irrational.
Or I see this a lot too, and I don't know where this would fall, but people, and we talked a little bit about this on the comparison podcast, but like when people essentially, oh, I used to do this, so I should be able to do this now, or the same way, or better.
Right.
It's like, well, maybe there's a few easy things that we could fix, or maybe your life just looks vastly different than it did 3 years ago, and you're in a totally different place, and that can be really, really hard to accept.
Right.
But it oftentimes is what we have to do, and it doesn't mean that we're rolling over and, fuck. Okay, I'm firing myself too. I don't know, but sometimes you should.
Ooh. It would benefit you.
It would benefit you to stop thinking this way, to correct your thought patterns. I don't know, but you guys get the gist. Clearly, I need to work on my language too and my emotions. So all good.
But I appreciate that because everybody does it, myself included. You heard me do it. My clients, a lot of the times, it's kind of fun. It becomes, in some of the different places that I work, which are very different places. But, my clients, a lot of times, they have a game with it. They're interacting with people and they're like, oh my God, I heard somebody say like should and must and all these kinds of things, and they start catching it and you become aware of it. And that's the key to change, is to become aware. If you're unaware of it, it stays this unknown motivating force that controls your life. And essentially what we're talking about here is regaining and establishing a sense of control and what you do have control over. And you are in control of what you think. You are in control of what you feel. And you are in control of how you behave. Unfortunately, we give that control to other people in other circumstances and other situations. And we look at it as, sometimes people will justify their anger and they'll say like, well, my anger gives me strength and it gives me power. And it's like, well, does it, or is it really harming you? Because other people have the ability to create anger in you. And so by being aware of these things, and that's what awareness does, is it draws it from this unconscious level to now we're consciously aware of it. And so now you can change it, and so when I hear people say stuff like, I can't do something, what I really hear is there's very few things in life that like you can't do. What I really hear you saying is I don't want to do it. Right? Or I choose not to do it. And now suddenly what we're hearing is when I say I choose not to do it, Now we're talking about is, all right, there is a power element in here. You are not helpless to this. You can change that. You're just choosing not to. And so now we're seeing the empowering start to come forward. Now we're seeing the person start to change and adapt. Why? Because they're aware of it and they can use some of these skills daily, regularly, right here, right now, to start changing the way that they think and being aware of those things.
Yeah, so we would encourage you guys to start, trying to figure out, everybody's going to have all of these things in varying degrees,
Sure.
Some more than others. There's some just based on your, your personality type and just everything, like you're going to fit some of these, oh wow, I really do the blaming thing a lot, or oh no, I really catastrophize. Everybody's going to have a few things. So really try and figure out, okay, not just, okay, I'm going to identify what I'm doing here. And then also, like you said, figuring out like the real reasons and like those deep beliefs as to why that's happening. And then you can actually challenge it, because if you just say like, oh, this is how I always think, this is what I always do, and we're all guilty of doing that, you know what I mean? Like, this is what I've always done, this is how it's always been, or this is how, like, it's just how you get...
And it becomes really scary to change it.
Yeah. Because change is really scary.
Right, and if you take something like where you're so used to seeing the negative in something, and now you can see the positive in it, but to actually take those steps and move it forward can be really terrifying, because now you're getting into a new space that you're unfamiliar with. At least before you were familiar. This is new, this is strange, I don't know how this is going to turn out. Now it's scary, now there's a lot more uncertainty with it, and this is also what causes people to avoid it, to stop doing it, we're good, right, I'm aware, and then they move on and they still are plagued by the same things, even though they now know it. So it's scary. So for those of you who are trying this and you struggle, the same thing I tell all of my clients is I look for progress, not perfection. Like, you were talking about those kind of micro adjustments through a 2-year period, like where you see one thing. And so, when we look at you month 1 versus month 6, we've seen some progress. It might not be huge, but we've seen some progress. Now we're a year in. Definitely a lot more progress from where you were day 1. 2 years in, or 18 months, or 2 years, you start to see there's a lot of progress that's made in that period of time. So give yourself a break if you're struggling with this, because it's not easy, and just keep at it. The more you keep at it, the better you'll be at it. And the better you're at it, the healthier and happier and more well-adjusted and peaceful you'll feel.
And then people will start reciprocating too, right? Like we talked about, if you are always, using these kind of cognitive distortions with other people, they're eventually going to either become that, right? Like
teaching them, sure.
Yeah, they're going to see that, and it is going to become this like self-fulfilling prophecy. So at some point, like, it's not only going to make you happier, but everybody else around you will be a lot happier too.
I got to share one story. So I was in grad school and I was learning about this, and I was learning about like shoulds and whatnot. And my teacher who told me, don't should on me, that kind of thing. And so me being who I am, I was home for the holidays, and I remember being in a car. I was like driving down the highway with my mom. And so she said something to me. She was telling me what to do, and she's like, you should do this, you should do this. And I looked at her and I was like, Mom, don't should on me. I kid you not, like I almost thought she was driving, she took her eyes completely off the road, looked at me, and she's like, you can take that psychology shit and throw it right out the window. Don't talk to your mother that way. I was like, awesome.
Okay.
So every once in a while you're gonna meet people that like don't care about what you're trying to work on. It might be your mom, it might be whoever, but you love them anyway, and just keep doing the work, and I promise you'll find somebody who will appreciate those changes.
It's like the most mom story ever.
Like totally, she took her eyes completely off the road and was like staring at me.
Smack you in the
we were going 70 miles an hour, and I was like, hello, cars, road, look ahead.
No.
So it was pretty funny. No, she didn't care at all.
All right, guys. So thank you so much. Again, if you didn't listen to the first episode of this week, I would highly encourage it. It makes a lot more sense going into this one. If you are interested in any consulting with Rick, his email is in the his email is in the show notes. Okay, grammar. And we will catch you guys next week. And cool. I'm so good at outros still. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Fucking